Hello, BookTube. I wanted to give you a Tuesday reads of a kind. Today, Boston is bracing for a snow and sleet storm that is just going to be, it looks like it's just going to be a mess. It looks like the late afternoon is going to be really heavy snow, fast accumulations, and then the whole thing is going to shift over to sleet, and then that whole mess is going to freeze solid when the temperatures drop and the sleet turns just to a coating of ice. It's going to be gross. Just gross. Perfect weather for staying inside and reading. So that's what I'm going to do. I've already been doing it all day long today, and I'm just going to continue. And I wanted to show you some of those books, just because I missed your faces. We hardly had any time yesterday together. I had a living flesh and blood human guest, and he didn't feel like being on camera. I'll work on him. It's nothing frightening. I always try to tell this to people. It's nothing frightening. It's fun. But in the meantime, I had to prioritize in-person company over anything else, over anything electronic. And that cut into my reading. It also cut into our time together. So I wanted to show you, these are some books that I am doing today, starting with something that I read a long time ago. I read it when it first came out. I went and bought it. I went to Barnes & Noble, the bookstore, and I bought it. A mass market paperback that has a $10 price tag on it. That was new to me. I knew that mass market paperbacks were hideously overpriced, but I didn't know they'd hit the $10 mark yet for a little lump of paper. I just can't. The Barnes & Noble I went to, I get an employee discount at Barnes & Noble, and I can't. Even then, it was hugely expensive. I can't imagine what. Anyway, it's this. It's Imager by Ellie Modesit. Some of you might remember in a recent mail haul, I got the last book in this series. The Imager series is, I don't know, 24 books long, something like that. And this is the first one. Kind of a neat cover. You see it in the glare there. But when I got the latest one, I have a couple of them. And when I got the latest one, I realized what I really want to do is not reread, book 7 or book 11 in a series. I want to go back and read the first one. And at first I thought, just email the publicist and ask for a copy of the first one. And then I thought, no. And then I thought, go to the library. Go to the Boston Public Library and take out Imager. Go and find it in the stacks and borrow it. But it just wasn't on my route. I need to get the Boston Public Library back into my routine. I really need to do that, and I will. This is a perfect example, and these examples come up all the time, where I get the 10th book in a series, or I get some new book and on a subject, and I remember a previous book that I don't have and that I don't particularly know that I would want to keep, even if I did have it. There's every single day, every week, I encounter at least a few good reasons to go to the Boston Public Library and make use of it. And I know that I would feel good if I did that. It's no harm to anything. I'm not talking about going there and working while my little puppy is alone at home. I'm talking about going there to use it as a library, the way people do, and I miss that. So this would have been a perfect thing, but it wasn't on my route, and I kept thinking, what if they don't have it? And and I was going to the bookstore anyway, so I just bought a copy. Because to be honest, I am probably not going to keep any of the later volumes in this series. I will probably just keep this one. Now the series is over, I'll probably just keep this one. But it's a classic high fantasy, city politics mixed with magic type series. I don't think Modesit was going for anything really original in this. Let me read you a little bit about it here. Although Renthil is the son of a leading wool merchant, he has spent years becoming a journeyman painter. As you can see on the cover, he's painting. With his skill and diligence, Ren stands to be considered for the status of master artisan. Then his life is transformed when his master patron is killed in a flash fire, and Ren discovers he is an imager, one of the few in the entire world who can visualize things and make them real. He must leave his family and join the Collegium of I've never understood how to say this word. Imagile? I think it's Imagile. Imagers live separately from the rest of society because of their abilities. They can do accidental magic even while asleep. And because they are both feared and vulnerable. In this new life, Ren discovers that all too many of the truths he knew were nothing of the sort. Every day brings a new threat to his life. I remember this came out, 10 years ago? A little hard for me to maneuver because my my other hand is being gently licked by a little puppy. And you don't want to disrupt that. This came out in 2009, so 10 years ago. And I remember liking it. I think I remember The Heresy of Heresies. I think I remember liking it more than his Recluse books. So that'll be one of the things we'll reread today. And then we move straight from there to other fantasy, because I got another fantasy novel. I don't get many of them, more now than I ever used to, but I don't get many of them. This is by Howard Andrew Jones, and it is For the Killing of Kings. And it's a fantasy epic by the author of The Desert of Souls. Some of you might remember The Desert. It has a really eye-catching cover. It was a story of 8th century Baghdad. It was fantasy woven into the real world of ancient Baghdad. Whereas this is the first book in an actual fantasy series where everything is made up. Let's see what we got here. The story begins with a mystery. A famed sword is missing from the Hall of Champions in the great city of Darassus. And in his place is an accurate forgery. The sword's presence is the only thing stemming the tide of war, and with it gone, the fragile peace between the kingdom and the noir hordes is threatened. The discovery of the forgery is inevitable, and soon a young squire and an infamous archer are on the run. Framed for murder and treason, pursued by the greatest heroes of the realm, the unlikely pair race to recover the real sword, only to stumble upon conspiracies leading all the way back to the Darassan royalty. So in other words, from the description, you can get the impression this is probably going to be as predictable as the sunrise, and as improbable as a lot of these fantasy epics are. If there are nomadic barbarian hordes who are keeping the peace because of this sword, why would they even know that it was a forgery? Why, the last thing in the world you would do is even care if it was a forgery. It wouldn't matter. You would just sit on that knowledge or kill the person who knows. But you wouldn't set out trying to find the real sword. What difference does it make? But also, I had problems with the Baghdad fantasy. I liked it. A lot of it was very evocative, but there were plot holes. Not so much plot holes as plot mechanics holes. Things where the more they happened in the course of the novel, the less I understood why they were even happening at all. So not so much you've got so-and-so in such a city, but in the next chapter he's in a different city, but rather the mechanics, almost the world building, that just seemed off to me. It seemed like there were holes that could be filled by a very attentive reading group before it ever saw an editor. And I don't know if it'll be true for this. Of course, we can't hold the pub sheet against the book, or the book against the pub sheet, but something in that description, I'm going to read it today and find out. Certainly, the Desert of Souls was. Did I mention when this comes out? This comes out it's out now. It's out on the 19th of February. But the Desert of Souls was certainly good enough so that, as I mentioned on this channel before, that authors can have a sort of a bank of goodwill, and the Desert of Souls was definitely good enough to have credit in that bank. So I will read this one. I won't be something in it strikes me as wrong, but I haven't read a single word of it. So all of that might be resolved in the first page. But I won't be going into it with knives drawn, because I am already a fan of this author. I do not understand this cover, because I find it hard to believe that I'm the only person who was favorably impressed by that first book, and it's not mentioned anywhere on here. Why wouldn't you just put a line down there? instead of making the reader dig around for it. I mean, I know it from the pub sheet, but like, for instance, on the dust jacket cover, the book isn't mentioned. You have to go to the author's biography. Oh my God, can you believe it? Howard Jones has worked variously as a TV cameraman, book editor, recycling consultant, and a college writing instructor. He assembled and edited 8 collections of Harold Lamb's historicals for the University of Nebraska Press, and served as a managing editor for Black Gate. He edits the sword and sorcery magazine Tales from the Magician's Skull, and serves as an executive editor of the Perilous Worlds book imprint. He lives on a small family farm with his wife and children, and can be found online at his website. Even his author bio doesn't mention that first book. I just don't get it. It's nowhere on this book. It's in the pub sheet, but readers won't see the pub sheet. They will have to go to, will they even mention it in the previous works? Yeah, the Desert of Souls. They mention it in his previous works, but they don't mention it anywhere else. So that's kind of odd. Maybe it's an intentional decision. Maybe they don't want to muddy the waters and make people think this is the second book in a series. That would be The Kiss of Death. Maybe they want to stress that it's the first book in a series. But if they want to stress that, where's the book number 1? Or an epic series begins here, or anything like that. It's the marketing of this one was odd. Then we have some nonfiction to round things out. This next one is by David Selborn, and it's called The Free Society in Crisis, A History of Our Times. And you only have to take one look at this book, or any book like it, to know that that subtitle is a bit of a lie. This is a Trump book. There are many books like this so far in 2019 and late 2018. I'm sure they will continue, where is democracy doomed? The Free Society in Crisis, Tough Times if you can handle them, Yours if you can keep it. All these sorts of books by these social commentators that purport to be about upheavals in societal trends, but they are really Trump books. They are really Trump books. If Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders had been elected president of the United States in 2016, there would not be a market for books wondering if all of human civilization was coming to an end. Those questions, those kinds of questions, are only live button issues producing book after book after book because the person who was elected president of the United States immediately started talking like a dictator. My generals, my Supreme Court, my Justice Department, persecute my enemies, run my enemies out of business, maybe go over their taxes, all threatened like a mob boss on social media for everyone to read. No one had ever thought that was possible, and all of these authors are responding to that. Whether they are honest enough to admit it or not, these are all Trump books. But, that having been said, some of them are very interesting. And this one, let me read you a bit about it. This one strikes me as at least making feints in the direction of a broader conceptual basis before hand-wringing about Trump. How stable are free societies today? See, we wouldn't be asking those questions if the 2016 presidential election had been different. We just wouldn't be. This book argues that they are under threat from, quote, market free choice and, quote, moral free choice. Two sides of the same coin, which between them, the author warns, threaten to tear civil society apart. Those two sides of the coin are embodied by Donald Trump. This author would not have made that dichotomy. He would not have come up with that image. But anyway, market free choice is the prevailing economic ideology that gives free rein to market forces even when they ride roughshod over communities and whole nations. Moral free choice, on the other side of the coin, is the notion of individual rights without any sense of civic responsibility. The result of such an ultra-individualism in economic and moral practice is the malaise we find ourselves in today, a lost sense of place, community, and belonging, as well as dismissiveness and unawareness of the lessons of the past. So, I don't need to look at the index of this thing to know that Trump is going to be all over it like a rash, but at least it sounds like this author has thought in broader terms as well. So we shall see. I'm not decrying this type of book at all, except for their marketing. I wish they all had the honesty to just admit that they're Trump books, outright. Maybe even put his name in the title. They might as well, because they wouldn't exist otherwise. The malaise that this author is talking about comes from the fact that the electoral college system in America put in office the loser of the popular vote for the second time in a decade. And that in both cases, the loser was not only lost by a large amount of votes, but is also appalling. An appalling figure. An appalling personal figure. Someone that a right-thinking person should be embarrassed to have as the leader of their country. In George W. Bush's case, a thug and a goon. In Donald Trump's case, an arrant criminal and racist. Things where even if the Electoral College or a tie in the Supreme Court that was decided by people that were hired by one of the recipient's father, even if those things hadn't been the case, you would still, when such people come to power in the most powerful country in the world, books like this follow in their wake. Inevitably, there were, people don't remember them now, but there were 24 of them when George W. Bush was handed the presidency by the Supreme Court, and this is at least the 24th to happen so far. It'll be a long time, before the dust settles enough for actual dispassionate historians to dig in and see what they can make of this time period. And the reason I know that is because they've only scarcely begun to do that with the George W. Bush era. And that's been a while. The wars are still ongoing, but the era has ended. And yet it's still radioactive. Historians have a hard time, almost an impossible time, sorting out their own feelings on the subject before they sort out the research. And the research material is abysmal. Because keep in mind, those two things, the George W. Bush era and now the Trump era, are also the internet era, which as I pointed out years ago, we're only just beginning to understand the damage to history, to the craft of history, that will be enacted by electronic communications, by programs that can't be read anymore, by emails that have been deleted, by electronic communications over phone and apps that don't leave the kind of records that letters do, that don't leave the kind of records that recorded phone calls do, they're a much dodgier process for historians. I don't know how that's going to shake out at all. But I'm going to read this anyway, and I'll read it with a wide open mind. Some of these books have pleased me. And then the next one is one we've seen on this channel before. We saw it just recently. I got it. I haven't dug into it right away. I'm going to dig into it today. This is Anton van der Lem, and this is Revolt in the Netherlands. It's his book about the 80 Years' War that he talks about on it sounds like on many, many levels. It's all beautifully illustrated. There are illustrations in color and black and white all through this thing. But he talks about it in broad terms, which is kind of encouraging for a book this short. The author recounts in vivid detail the roles of key protagonists, the decisive battles, and the war's major turning points, from the Spanish governor's Council of Troubles to the 12 Years' Truce and the Peace of Munster, while all the time unraveling the shifting political, religious, and military alliances that would entangle the foreign powers of France and Italy, Germany and England. He also makes clear that the 80 Years' War was not only a battle for independence, but a civil war, one that split towns and regions and families. That's a great point. And that the last time I read a section in a larger book on the 80 Years' War, the author completely missed that. So that I have very high hopes for this book to really hit a sweet spot for me. So that is a bit of a Tuesday reads for you. It's a little bit over the map, a couple of fantasies, a Trump book, and a history. So we've got Revolt in the Netherlands, the 80 Years' War, a multi-country spanning conflict that most people don't know anything about. So wonderful to see this from Reaction Books. Then the Free Society in Crisis, about how rampant consumerism and amorality are threatening to tear civil society apart. They are not really. Their foremost human embodiment is threatening to tear civil society apart. But they've had embodiments in the past as well. I will be arguing with the author throughout the whole book, but as you know, those can sometimes be the most fun books. So, and then For the Killing of Kings, the first in a new fantasy series by an author who clearly does not want readers, or his publisher clearly does not want readers to remember that he ever wrote anything else. Kind of odd. It takes a lot of work to write a book. And the last book that he wrote was good. It's kind of odd. Maybe it's a contractual thing. Maybe that previous book was with a different author, a different publishing house, or something like that. One way or another, this author has a bank of goodwill, so I'm looking forward to this book. And a reread of a fantasy from 10 years ago, Imager, by Elie Modesset, only because the last book in the series, the final book in the series, just reached me. Otherwise, I don't think I would ever have gone back to it unless maybe I saw a hardcover at the Brattle, which would have been, I want to stress again, 1/10 the price of this paperback. This is not a larger paperback. This is an ordinary pocket-sized paperback, and it is $10. So anyway, that's my Tuesday reading as the snow begins, and then the sleet, and then the ice, and then the rain. Oh, good. The real question isn't today, because Frida and I can just hold up inside and read, or play, or kiss, or nap, or whatever. The real question will be tomorrow. If I actually want to go outside tomorrow, if I want to go anywhere, oh my God, it sounds like it's going to be awful. We'll have to hope for the best. We'll have to hope that the forecasts are wrong by even a quarter of a mile, and that I get mostly rain. That would be wonderful. Anyway, I will wrap this up for now, but we have other things to do, other bookish things to talk about, so I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.